But let's kick off Pro Soccer Talk this week, gents, and focus on what really has become the main story in the Premier League, the battle for fourth place. Arsenal and Tottenham. Obviously, heading into the final two games, Arsenal have a 1-point advantage over Tottenham. They sit in fourth, Tottenham in fifth, but obviously Tottenham clawed back 3 points by that big 3-0 win at home against Arsenal. Nick, what did you think of that game, that performance? Was it that Tottenham were very good? Because they were, I thought, very, very energetic and a very Antonio Conte type display. But was it also Arsenal were their own worst enemies with some of those really silly mistakes that cost them dear, especially in the first half? Because I know Mikel Arteta has some problems and some issues with the refereeing, but it felt like those are very just problems they caused themselves, right?
It was kind of neat to be watching one of these big games and not having to write about it, because I had that experience where you're just kind of observing and having fun with the game as we like to do as soccer fans. And I really do think that a lot of this was Tottenham being very, very good. There were things for Arsenal, obviously Rob Holding came out with a plan, whether directed or not, to be a menace, and he took it too far. I mean, I just think that's the easy way to look through it. Lost his mind a little bit. But yeah, in my mind, there's only really one thing about it, and it was that Tottenham looked again, as they have increasingly. This is how it's supposed to work with managers, like an Antonio Conte team, and they have the pieces to do it. And I mean, I don't know how much of a piece top four is going to be, but as we discuss this team moving forward, man, does Harry Kane work well in that system?
He really does. He was brilliant. 2 goals, obviously really influential in Son's goal as well. And I agree. Arsenal actually started pretty well, I thought. First 15, 20 minutes, they were decent up until the penalty. And then they kind of crumbled and then they took it too far, right? I mean, I think the emotion and just the spirit of that derby and being in the stadium, that was the loudest I've ever heard it. All the streets around the stadium in North London were buzzing on Derby Day and have been for a few days ahead of this game, given the situation that they're so close to each other. The stakes are so high. Both teams desperately want to get back into the Champions League. So I feel like there's a really fine line, right, between Holding, doing a really good job, but then he just stepped over the mark. And that was a huge, huge mistake for Arsenal. And they've got that in their locker. Under Mikel Arteta, they've had more red cards since he's come in as manager than any other Premier League team. So he demands that physicality, but I feel like sometimes it can just be a bit too intense. But Andy, in the context of this battle for fourth, what will that win do for Tottenham? Does that give them extra momentum? Because now both teams have 2 games that on paper they should win both of those, so Arsenal should finish fourth. But it just feels like psychologically Tottenham are in a better place than Arsenal heading into this final week of the season.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Going into the derby, obviously all the pressure was on Spurs, 4 points behind, just 3 games to go. They really had a lot of work to do. If they lost, Arsenal would have clinched on their home field. It would have been a really, really horrendous situation for Spurs. And now I think it puts all the pressure back onto Arsenal and the fact that they are the younger side, the youngest average starting age for starting 11 in the Premier League. I think we saw that come out just a little bit in that game as well. Obviously, Rob Holding, one of the more, veteran guys in that squad that Mikel Arteta picked. I don't know if he would have been in there if he would have had everybody available to choose from for that game. But Rob Holding, I think Nick nailed it. He came out from minute 1 and said, I'm going to wind up Son Heung-min, and I'm going to try and get in his head. I'm going to try and affect him. And I think he did more damage to himself. And I think he got a little too caught up into that situation and maybe showed a little bit of, I would say he's inexperienced, but maybe in games of that magnitude with that much riding on it, Rob Holding's probably not played in many games like that. And neither have many of the other players in that team. And so now the pressure, I think, really does pile onto them, because any slip up, it does look like Spurs are going to be able to capitalize. When you look at the games that they've got left, when you look at the performance that they were able to put in, Harry Kane had the most nothing blah performance to score 2 goals in a game that he's maybe ever had. And he was still okay. Son Heung-min, really, really good in that game. Dejan Kulusevski, really, really good in that game. So it does feel like Conte has got this team at the right part of the season. Maybe you would have wanted it about a month earlier or so when they dropped a couple of games. But at the end of the season, they are playing the best stuff that they've played all year. It just makes me long to go back to last summer when Daniel Levy could have appointed Antonio Conte the first time around and then ended up, all due respect to Nuno Espirito Santo, wasted 10 games to start the season, put themselves in a little bit of a hole and then had to dig out. Conte's done brilliantly. The players have done brilliantly to take his ideas on board, and the way that he's using, and I've mentioned him before, Ben Davies as a left-sided center back, Eric Dyer anchoring the defense in the middle, and you don't have Christian Romero, your best, inarguably your best defender for the biggest game of the season. You keep a clean sheet against your biggest rivals. You rarely get threatened. I thought it was about 5 minutes to start the game that Arsenal looked good, and it was more so just the pressure that they were putting on Spurs as they tried to play out of the back. And so mentally, I was worried about Spurs to start that game. And then they just came out of it and they looked completely comfortable the rest of the way.
They did. And Nick, for Arsenal, do you think the momentum, that the lack of it from losing a derby like that, and the way that Arteta reacted afterwards, the mistakes, the defensive injuries? I mean, Gabriel went down late holding his hamstring. Ben White didn't even come off the bench because he clearly isn't fully fit. Holding's now suspended, and Tierney's out at left back. So there's a lot of issues here for Arsenal to sort out late in the season. I would argue that Arteta's still done a fabulous job, even if they do cough up, a couple of points here and they do finish fifth. I still think they're ahead of where they should have been this season. When you look at what Andy said, they're the youngest team average age-wise in the Premier League. But still, it will feel really bad for them, right? If they do cough up a few results here and Tottenham overtake them, Tottenham of all teams overtake them in the final week of the season to finish fourth. But when you look at their game at Newcastle on Monday, and then they host Everton on the final day, and Everton most likely will need at least a point, maybe even a win to stay in the Premier League. Those are not two easy games. What do you expect from Arsenal in these final two games of the season for them?
Yeah, not to do a mini sort of match week preview, but I think this is a really troubling test for them to go up north for whatever reason. Again, I make jokes about this all the time because, being in the United States, an away game for us is sometimes hours and hours and hours, like changeover on the flight situation. But for some reason, going up to Northern England has been a real hassle for teams. And it's the same recipe that I presented a couple weeks ago, and Liverpool were simply too good and are too good to have really coughed it up. But Newcastle's going to have Callum Wilson back, and Kieran Trippier certainly does not like Arsenal. And then the Everton case. So it's not so much that the mismatch is there. Arsenal should win both of these games, but seeing that they played and their opponents are either desperate or lying in wait or both, I think there's a lot of reason to be worried. And it would have been a worry even if yesterday was a slim loss. I think this is really, really tricky for them.
Andy, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think, we've seen Arsenal we've seen both these sides go up against teams that they should be beating and just not show up. And you do that in the middle of the season and you can kind of write it off and say, it wasn't their day. They were, focused on this. They were focused. There is nothing else to focus on for either of these sides right now. And so in theory, you're going to get the most focused, most detailed performance that you should see all season. And so I do think that the experience and the age might play into that just a little bit. And maybe we're starting to see a little bit of a crumbling from Arsenal here down the stretch because and I was thinking about this yesterday, and Robbie Earle and Robbie Mustoe had a little bit of a spirited, debate. Robbie Earle made a couple funny faces like he thought Musty was, out of his mind when they were talking about, well, who needs this more? Who would finishing fourth be bigger for? And I think I think Arsenal need it more because if you look at where their squad is right now at this point, they are younger and there will be more development. There will be more growth coming from that group. But when you think about it from a squad building perspective, they need a lot more kind of prime age stars to come into that team and really supplement what's a good young core if they're going to, one, go into the Champions League next season, or two, try to chase the Champions League again next season. For Spurs, it's a lot more experience. It's a lot more players that have been in that competition before. It's more prime age players who, I think know exactly what's expected and can get them there. So it's crazy to say that with 2 games to go, the team that's a point behind, it does feel like everything is kind of tilting in their favor.
I do feel like Tottenham probably need this more, though. I would kind of go against that. I just think Antonio Conte has been so outspoken about his ambitions for the club and how great of a job he's done, and he has done a great job, but he's letting everyone know that ahead of the summer transfer window. And I just don't feel like, I feel like if they don't get in the Champions League, then the funds aren't going to be there for him to bring in the kind of caliber of players that he wants. And I feel like the whole project could just fall apart, and we could be talking about Graham Potter or someone else coming in to Tottenham in a few months from now.
Well,
So I think it's a bit more precarious for Tottenham, the situation. If Arsenal fall at the final couple hurdles and finish fifth, Arteta's still going to be there next year. That young squad is largely still going to be together. But if Tottenham aren't in the Champions League, I question whether Conte is going to be there, Harry Kane, and then I don't know. It's these two teams, like you said so many times, Andy, they seem to find each other one way or another throughout the season. They're in such a similar situation, and it is kind of flip of a coin in terms of who deserves it or who needs it more. You can make very good arguments for both sides. So this is what makes it even more intense, and I think why the atmosphere was so great in that North London. You want to jump in here? I feel like you want to.
Yeah, I do. I think with Conte, it's going to end badly no matter whether they get into the Champions League or not. And it might be next season. In the Champions League, it could be. That just kind of seems to be the MO for when he goes to a club, and especially a club, you know, of Tottenham's size. You know, for him, it seemed like it was a step down for a guy that's been at Chelsea, that's been at Juventus, that's been at some of the biggest clubs in the world. You know, he came in with almost a sense of entitlement, and maybe that sounds a bit harsh, but demanding things that no other Spurs manager had done before, and I don't think you could begrudge him that, because he does have the experience. He's got the resume that says, if you give me what I'm asking for, we will win. And so I think Daniel Levy, I'm going to cross my fingers and I'm going to say, I think that whether they get into the Champions League this summer or not, I think he's going to back the manager that he has, because I think he has seen over the course, especially the second half of the season, maybe even the last couple of months of the season, that he has got a genuinely world-class manager, and he does not want to mess that up, because he went through the cycle of having to fire Maurizio Pochettino, bringing in Jose Mourinho, bringing in Nuno Espirito Santo, and we all know how that went. And now he's got something that's really growing in a positive manner. Whether they get over the line for fourth place or not, I think that there's so much more to come from this squad with one, maybe two signings. They don't need a ton, because you bring in Bentancur, you bring in Kulusevski in January, and you plugged two of the biggest holes in the squad. I would argue they need one center back, and that just about sets them, maybe a fullback as well, but that just about sets them up to be too deep at every position in the system that Conte wants to play.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I just feel like we've been here so many times at Tottenham, right? This is their opportunity to spend big and take the next step and back a manager. And they just haven't been able to do that for many reasons. The stadium move, obviously the wage structure before. But this feels like if they do make the top four this season, it feels like they can move into a different kind of area, shall we say, in terms of the top clubs in Europe and in the Premier League. I spoke to Harry Kane after the game, and he was a bit mischievous. I've got the article up on Pro Soccer Talk and NBCSports.com, and he basically told us in the mix zone afterwards, the pressure's all on Arsenal now. We play first. If we take care of business against Burnley in match week 37, then we're going to sit up together, watch the game on Monday night. Arsenal got to go to Newcastle. They're a very good team, and we'll be hoping for a good Newcastle result and then go from there. So Kane was just smiling a little bit while he was saying it. He knows that this was a big win, and obviously Tottenham had to win. He's not getting ahead of himself, but they're just trying to crank the pressure up on Arsenal a little bit. I think it does build into that narrative, like we said, about the younger players on Arsenal haven't been in this situation before. And Kane also talked about the experience, the fact that Tottenham played so well in a pressurized situation, and that will hold them in good stead in these final two games of the season against Burnley and Norwich. So Nick, I'm just going to ask you flat out, who's going to finish fourth in the Premier League? Go.
Arsenal. I do think Tottenham's better off, but I just look at them and I see them not failing at this final hurdle. It's kind of the same thing with Man City, which we've been saying for a while. In the grand scheme of things, 2 games to win against 2 teams that they're arguably better than. Again, I say that with some real grief, because I think Newcastle could maybe get a point off them, and that might be enough. But I just Arsenal.
Andy, do I have to ask you?
I cannot say what I think, or I would be suspended 6 months.
Oh, Mr. Arteta, thank you for joining us. Okay, so you're going to sit firmly on the fence and just try and enjoy
No,
it.
it's Arsenal's to lose, and
Okay.
and that's that's nothing. That's inarguable. I think at this point, it's going to come down to I think the Newcastle game. I think that's the really big one. They've got to go away from home. A team that over the last couple months has been pretty good. What happened against Manchester City happens to a lot of teams. Hopefully that didn't break the confidence of Newcastle for these last couple of games. I think a lot of players at Newcastle have a lot to play for because I think we all know what's going to happen this summer with regards to the new owners and the money that's going to be pumped into the squad and the transfer market. And so maybe a couple of really strong performances from a couple of players might keep them in that squad for next season.
I'm going to go with Tottenham. I think it's going to go down to the final day. I think they will both win on Sunday and Monday against Burnley and Newcastle, respectively. And then I just think it's going to be difficult for Arsenal in terms of Everton on the final day. The way they're playing, back five, they may need a point to see it out. Again, it depends on that situation. But I just feel like it would be a very Arsenal thing to have a game against Everton on the final day. And all you have to do is win it to get in the Champions League. And it'll be a 90th minute penalty to Everton or something like that will happen. And I fully expect Tottenham to take care of business away at Norwich City. So, yeah, I'm going to go for Tottenham. I think they've got the momentum. And but it's so close. It's so close. I'm sure everyone in the comment section is going to be agreeing massively on this debate. So over at Pro Soccer Talk and NBCSports.com, we'll keep you updated with all the latest news from the top four battle. My word, it's getting intense out there. And let's see who can be the hero or perhaps the villain for these teams as they chase Champions League qualification and to get back into the big time and into the final two games of the season. What a battle this is on the two sides of North London.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe, studio host for NBC's coverage of the Premier League. Don't forget to hit subscribe to watch highlights all season long and be sure to tune in for Premier League mornings every weekend at 7 a.m. Eastern. And for even more content, head over to Peacock, where we've got live games, original series and a dedicated round-the-clock Premier League channel featuring studio shows, classic matches and much more.